If you'd asked anyone in our neighborhood about the Millers, they'd probably tell you we had it all figured out. Big brick house with white shutters, manicured lawn, the flag out front waving just right in the Texas breeze. Ethan and I were the couple people pointed to at church picnics and said, "That's real love right there." I used to believe that too. We met at a volunteer build site for Habitat for Humanity. Ethan was charming, all confidence and calloused hands, saying he believed in fixing what's broken. I thought he meant people, not just wood and nails. 20 years later, I still wake up sometimes wondering if that man I married ever truly existed, or if I just made him up in my head. I built my life around him. Our home, our daughter Sophie, our future plans that were supposed to stretch into old age like a shared dream. But somewhere along the way, something in his eyes changed. I couldn't tell you the exact day it happened. It was more like a slow fade. The laughter turned into silence, the warmth into obligation, and I started to feel like a piece of furniture he'd grown tired of looking at. Our life looked perfect on paper. Ethan ran a growing construction company, I managed interior design projects from home, and our 17-year-old daughter, Sophie, was applying to colleges. Every Sunday, we had breakfast at the same diner. He'd read the business section while I picked at my pancakes, pretending not to notice how often he checked his phone. At night, he'd sit in the office downstairs with the door half shut, typing away at something he called quotes and estimates. I didn't want to be that paranoid wife who snoops through her husband's things, so I told myself he was just working. But there's a tone men get when they start lying, a polished sweetness that sounds almost like care. Ethan had started using that tone on me. I remember the first real moment my gut told me something was off. It was late April, one of those heavy nights when the Texas heat presses through the windows like steam. Ethan had come home from a client dinner, smelling faintly of cologne he didn't own. He kissed my forehead instead of my lips, said he was exhausted, and went straight to shower. When he came back, his phone buzzed, and his whole face changed. The kind of look that flickers for only a second, like panic caught in headlights. I pretended not to notice. I kept pretending for weeks, maybe because I was scared of what I'd find if I looked too closely. I ironed his shirts, packed his lunches, smiled when neighbors said we were relationship goals. But in the quiet of our bedroom, while he scrolled on his phone with the screen tilted away from me, I could feel something invisible pulling us apart. I started replaying every little habit in my head. How he started leaving early for meetings, how his voice got distant when I called, how his phone never left his pocket, even in the shower. Once, I reached for it on the nightstand, just to check the time, and he flinched like I'd aimed a gun. That's when I realized this wasn't my imagination. Something real was happening, something ugly. Still, I stayed quiet. I wanted to believe that good wives don't accuse without proof, that if I just kept things steady, it would pass. But in my gut, I knew the woman I used to be, secure, trusting, peaceful, was slowly being replaced by someone new, someone colder, sharper, waiting. My friends used to tell me I was lucky, that Ethan was one of those good ones. And I guess he was in the beginning. He bought me flowers for no reason, made me coffee every morning, and always said, "We're a team, Grace." I held on to that like scripture. But lately, he had been more interested in his reflection than in me. I caught him spending too long in front of the mirror, adjusting his shirt collar, checking his hairline. He'd never been vain before. He'd also started working out again, not the casual treadmill kind, but the sudden midlife crisis kind, with protein shakes and gym selfies he claimed were for company morale. I laughed it off at first. But when you've lived with someone for 2 decades, you learn to read their smallest changes like weather signs. And Ethan's weather was turning fast. Still, I told myself marriage has seasons, that maybe we drifted into one of those long, silent winters couples go through before thawing out again. I even convinced myself to plan a surprise for our 20th anniversary, a small cabin getaway near Lake Travis. I booked it quietly, imagining we'd spend the weekend talking, maybe laughing like we used to. But as I packed his favorite shirt one morning, I noticed something strange in his pocket, a hotel key card, gold and embossed with the logo from a place in Dallas. He told me he hadn't been to Dallas in months. My fingers trembled as I turned the card over, reading the room number stamped faintly on the back. It felt like holding proof of a crime I didn't want solved. I didn't confront him that day. Instead, I slid the card back and made breakfast like nothing happened. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't explode, it seeps. It finds every small crack in your trust and settles there quiet and corrosive. Ethan smiled at me over his coffee, told me I looked beautiful in my robe, and for a second I almost wanted to believe him again. But in that same second, I saw the flicker of guilt behind his eyes, and that's when I knew my marriage wasn't just slipping away, it was already gone. The man sitting across from me wasn't my partner anymore. He was a stranger, rehearsing lines in a play he no longer believed in. I remember that morning like a still photograph, the sunlight cutting through the blinds, the smell of black coffee, and the faint hum of the dishwasher. Ethan sat across from me at the table, scrolling through emails, his wedding ring glinting like it still meant something. I wanted to reach across, touch his hand, ask him if he remembered the man he used to be, the one who built a swing for my niece, who kissed me on the forehead after every argument. But I didn't. I just stirred sugar into my coffee until the spoon clinked against the cup like a clock, counting down. Something about that silence felt dangerous. Not loud, not angry, just empty, like someone had quietly moved out of our marriage and forgotten to tell me. That's how it started. Not with betrayal, but with indifference. The small things began to change first. Ethan started showering right after coming home, his phone glued to him like an extra limb. His shirt smelled faintly of unfamiliar perfume, floral, expensive, something I didn't own. One night while folding laundry, I found a hotel receipt tucked in his jeans pocket. Dallas Marriott, 1 king bed, 2 cocktails. No conference listed. I stared at it until the numbers blurred. For a full hour, I just sat there on the floor, my back against the dryer, listening to it hum like a heartbeat. I didn't cry. I didn't even confront him. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, that there was a reasonable story behind it. But deep down, something inside me shifted, like a hairline crack spreading across glass. I became an investigator in my own home, checking phone bills, watching his patterns, noticing the days he came home late, the lies he told with easy grace. Traffic was hell, he'd say, while his tie hung a little too loose, his eyes a little too alive. Once, while he showered, I unlocked his phone, hands trembling, heart hammering, and saw a name I didn't recognize: Camille. The messages were short, coded, but the tone was unmistakable. Miss you already. Same spot tomorrow? It felt like reading my own obituary. I sat there on the bathroom floor, the phone screen lighting up my face, while he hummed behind the curtain, washing off another woman's scent. The next morning, I played my part perfectly. I made his favorite breakfast: eggs sunny side up, bacon crisp. I smiled, kissed his cheek, and waved as he drove off to work. But inside, something had gone cold. I followed him that day. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, but my eyes were steady. He didn't go to the firm. He drove across town to a little cafe, the kind of place you only find by accident or habit. She was already there. Camille. Younger, blonde, the kind of woman who still thought married men leave their wives for love. I watched them from my car as he leaned in to whisper something that made her laugh. I should have left right then, but I couldn't. It felt like watching a stranger wearing my husband's skin. When Ethan came home that night, smelling faintly of her perfume, I asked him how work was. He said, exhausting, rubbing his temples. I nodded and said, you deserve a break. My voice was calm, maybe too calm. He didn't notice the way my hands were clenched under the table, nails digging into my palms. Later that night, I watched him sleep, peacefully, carelessly. I studied the lines on his face. The mouth that used to whisper promises, now stained with lies. For the first time in 20 years, I realized how little I knew him, how easily love turns into habit and habit into blindness. The next few weeks were a slow unraveling. I started keeping a journal, not of my feelings, but of his movements, dates, times, patterns, every lie cataloged in black ink. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about clarity, about knowing the truth before deciding what to do with it. Sometimes in the middle of the night, I'd walk into the guest room just to breathe without him beside me. I began to see things clearly for the first time in years. The imbalance, the manipulation, the quiet erasure of who I used to be. My love for him hadn't died. It had evolved into something sharper, something that no longer begged for honesty, but planned for it. And though Ethan didn't know it yet, the woman who once adored him was gone. In her place stood someone else, someone patient, deliberate, and unafraid of darkness. The day everything snapped was a Tuesday. Ordinary in every way except for the way the air felt heavier, like it knew what I was about to do. I had spent weeks gathering proof. Phone records, hotel receipts, screenshots of texts. Every lie Ethan ever told me sat neatly printed in a folder labeled tax documents. I didn't plan to confront him yet, but fate didn't ask me first. That morning, he kissed my forehead before leaving, said he had a conference dinner. I nodded, heart steady this time, not breaking, but waiting. When he left, I followed again, the folder on the passenger seat beside me like a silent witness. He wasn't headed toward downtown this time. He drove straight to Camille's apartment complex. I parked a block away, my hands cold on the steering wheel. Watching him disappear into her building felt like watching the final nail go into the coffin of my old life. I didn't cry this time. I went home instead, methodically, like I was following a recipe. I cooked dinner, his favorite, pot roast and mashed potatoes, and set the table with the good china. Candles, wine, music soft in the background. The kind of scene he always bragged about to his friends. My wife still takes care of me. Around 8, he walked in, looking surprised, then guilty. Dinner? He asked, trying for normal. I smiled. Of course, you work so hard. We sat down. He talked about his clients, and I nodded. The rhythm so familiar it almost made me laugh. Then halfway through his second glass of wine, I slid the folder across the table. You left this at work, I said. His hands froze before touching it. One look at the first page, and his face drained of color. Silence swallowed the room. You went through my stuff, he said finally, voice cracking like glass. No, I replied, calm as ice. I went through our life. For a moment, neither of us moved. The only sound was the clock ticking above the mantel. He tried to speak, to spin it into one of his practice stories, but every word stumbled. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut deep. Her name is Camille. She likes vanilla lattes and works at an interior design firm on Fifth. You met her at that client meeting last spring. His eyes widened. You've been following me? No, I said softly. I've been paying attention. There it was. The truth, naked and ugly between us. He reached out like he wanted to touch my hand, but I pulled away. His touch used to comfort me. Now it burned. That night, he slept in the guest room. I could hear him pacing through the wall, whispering curses to himself, maybe rehearsing apologies that would never be enough. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling oddly calm. Pain had become familiar by then, almost domestic. In the morning, he tried to talk, coffee in hand, hair messy, eyes tired.
Grace, please, we can fix this. It didn't mean anything. I almost laughed. The sentence men always say when caught. You destroyed something that meant everything to me. And that's what it meant. I walked out before he could reply, grabbing my keys and heading to the lake. It was our favorite place once, the spot where he'd proposed. The water looked gray that morning, restless. I sat on the dock for hours, letting the wind sting my face until I couldn't tell if the tears were from pain or cold. Over the next few days, the house became a museum of ghosts. 2 toothbrushes, 2 coffee mugs, photos of a couple that didn't exist anymore. Ethan kept trying flowers, texts, promises, but they landed flat. I saw the same arrogance beneath his apologies, the same belief that I'd eventually forgive him, like I always did. But forgiveness felt foreign now, like a language I'd forgotten. One night, I caught him crying on the porch, head in his hands. I almost went to him. Almost. Then I remembered the hotel receipt in his pocket, the perfume on his shirt, the way he said conference dinner without blinking. And I realized something important. He wasn't sorry for breaking me. He was sorry for being caught. Something changed in me that night. I stopped waiting for him to fix what he destroyed. Instead, I started thinking about rebuilding without him. I found a lawyer, quietly, moved half our savings into a new account. I stopped cooking dinner, stopped pretending. The woman who used to orbit around Ethan's moods, his lies, his love, she was gone. What replaced her wasn't anger, but precision, purpose. I knew I'd leave soon, but not before he understood what it felt like to live in uncertainty. So I started smiling again. Softer, colder, just enough to make him think things might be healing. He relaxed. He stopped checking my tone, stopped noticing how late I stayed out. That's when I knew he was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life. Because sometimes revenge doesn't scream, it whispers.
Ethan didn't notice how quiet I'd become. Or maybe he did but mistook it for forgiveness. That was his mistake, assuming silence meant surrender. I began to plan everything in the same meticulous way he had planned his lies. Each move small, invisible, perfect. I told him I'd started volunteering at the library again. But really, I was meeting with my lawyer. I told him the spa weekend was a mental break, but I was touring apartments across town. I even started smiling more at dinner, laughing at his tired jokes, making him believe we were healing. He started leaving his phone out again, like that could earn him trust back. Every night, I'd wash the dishes and imagine how it would feel the day he realized the person sitting across from him wasn't his wife anymore, just the echo of what he destroyed. Revenge wasn't loud for me. It was patient, quiet, the kind that burned slow but deep. The first step was the house. I had built that home. Every wall, every color, every photograph. But now it felt like a museum of a dead marriage. So I sold it. Not openly, of course. I transferred the deed into a trust in my name, listed it through a private broker, and waited. When the offer came, I accepted it before Ethan could blink. The next morning, I left the closing papers on the kitchen counter under his coffee mug. When he saw them, he went pale. "You sold our house?" he whispered. "My house," I corrected. "You signed the transfer when you stopped reading the paperwork I asked you to." It wasn't a lie. He had signed everything blindly for months. "Where will we live?" he asked, desperate. "You'll figure it out," I said. Walking past him, my heels clicking on the tile like punctuation marks to the sentence of our life. He tried calling Camille that night. I know because I saw the reflection of his phone light through the window. She didn't answer. Maybe she'd moved on. Maybe she realized he wasn't worth the ruin. Either way, he was alone now. The same way I'd been for years. In the weeks that followed, I watched him unravel in slow motion. He'd sit in the kitchen for hours, staring at nothing, waiting for me to change my mind. But I didn't.
I had already made my final decision to leave him not in rage, but in silence. One evening, I cooked dinner for the last time. Pot roast again. The same meal from the night I confronted him. "Why are you being nice to me?" he asked, suspicion flickering. "Because this is goodbye," I said softly. He froze, fork halfway to his mouth. "You don't mean that." I smiled. "I do. You just didn't notice I've been leaving you piece by piece." The next morning, I was gone before he woke. My clothes, my files, my mother's photo, all packed neatly in the car. I left him a note on the table written in the same calm tone he used to end his late-night texts with Camille. "Ethan, I'm not angry anymore. I'm not hurt. I'm free. You took years of my life, but I'm taking back what's left of it. Consider this balance restored." When he called, I didn't answer. He texted for weeks, promises, apologies, even threats. I blocked him. The silence that followed was heavy, but peaceful. For the first time in decades, I could breathe without measuring it against someone else's presence. I moved into a small apartment overlooking the lake where we'd once planned our future. Funny how peace and endings can look so much alike. Months passed, divorce finalized, settlement secured. I learned to live small. No grand house, no elaborate dinners, no pretending. Just me, the sound of my own voice, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I didn't crumble. Sometimes I still see Ethan's name pop up in local news, some charity event, some minor award. He smiles for the camera like the man I once knew. But when I look closely, his eyes are empty. That's when I know he finally understands what he did. That the worst punishment isn't losing someone's love. It's living with the ghost of who they used to be. People ask me if I ever think about revenge. I smile and tell them no. Because revenge, for me, was never about hurting him. It was about reclaiming myself. Now when I wake up in my quiet apartment, sunlight spilling across the floor, I make coffee for one. Sometimes I walk to the lake and sit on the dock where I'd once cried over him. The water is calmer now, just like me. There's a peace that comes after the fire, when you've burned every false thing down and realized the only person you needed to save was yourself. Ethan used to say I was too soft for this world. Maybe he was right, but softness doesn't mean weakness. It means I survived without becoming like him. That's my revenge. Quiet, complete. And when I close my eyes at night, I don't see his face anymore. Just light, soft, steady, mine.